In third grade, my teacher said to me, if we could get you to learn to love to read, I think you would learn to spell.
Mm-hmm.
And so she asked me, what do you enjoy? And I said, well, I loved babies. And I loved babysitting. And she said, let's go to the library. So we went to the school library and she showed me the Babysitter Club series.
Oh, yeah.
And oh my goodness, I fell in love with reading.
From the Florida Parent Educators Association, home of the largest homeschool convention in America, this is the Not by the Book podcast. I'm your host, FPEA Chairman Suzanne Nunn, and together we will hear from guests who share their journey to who and where they are today. Each one of them at some point left the expected path, ripped the page out of the book that says, you have to do it like this, and made their own way. I hope these conversations inspire you as much as they do me. Today I have a fun conversation with author Gabrielle Meyer, creator of the Timeless series and other wonderful stories. We talk about falling in love with history and all the ins and outs of becoming a writer and being published. But, of course, no conversation with Gabrielle would be complete without a little excursion across time and story. I'm sure you'll enjoy this conversation. Let's listen.
So I grew up in central Minnesota, literally on the banks of the Mississippi River. My dad was a caretaker for a large historic estate. The estate was built in the 1890s by lumber barons.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 2 mansions on this 9-acre property on the Mississippi. And we lived in the carriage house, the apartment above the carriage house, kind of like Sabrina.
That's the
not
coolest.
Yeah, not quite that posh.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm the third of 4 children. And my parents were married at the age of 17 and 18, very, very young. And so very young parents.
Mm-hmm.
But they've been married now for over 50 years. It's a huge testament to their faith in Jesus that they made it that far. So I was raised at that historic estate, and it had such a huge impact on who I am now as a person and as a writer, because I used to look up at those mansions, and there was still one family member who lived there. She was in her 80s when she passed away.
Wow.
And I used to ask my mom so many questions, because I knew it was a unique childhood. I knew none of my other friends lived in a house like we did, on property like we did. So I knew there was something special about it. And so I used to ask her a lot of questions, and then would kind of fill in the blanks and make up stories. And my sister and I have a sister that's 2 years younger than me. We would play make-believe, and we were always in a mansion, and
Of course.
and so that was really where my interest in history began, and kind of my interest in storytelling. We moved out of there when I was 9 years old, and my parents being young still and trying to find their way, we lived in several different rental houses. But about that time, when I was 11, my parents were struggling with my oldest brother. He was being bullied in school. And so they decided to start homeschooling us. So we started homeschooling in 1991, which there was not a lot of people. Super new. We knew of just a handful of families in our community who homeschooled, but it was the best thing that my parents could have ever done. It was a hard climb for us, though. Like, my grandparents had absolutely no idea what my parents were doing. People in our church had no idea. We would go to the grocery store, and I just remember so many people like, what? Why are you not in school? But that was just so impactful for our family, and again, for my love of history, because my mom really understood that we had a unique opportunity to learn. And so she knew I loved history, and so she used to bring me out to our county historical society from about the age of 12 on, and that was where Yeah. So it's very unique for a 12-year-old to be sitting, volunteering out at the museum, especially at that time. I think homeschooling has really changed a lot, and it's not so unique anymore, but it definitely was back then. So that's kind of where my background, what happened with me.
So lots of opportunity for imagination to run wild and I can just imagine. I can't imagine. I think that would be so incredible to live in a scenario like that at a young
Yeah.
age and just be able to explore and dream and imagine all of the possibilities. So you had a natural and early love for history, you said,
Mhm.
and you were homeschooled. What did you do during your early elementary and middle school years that was interest besides your schooling? What was there besides that?
Sure. Like I said, I used to go to our county historical society all the time, and I just learned so much about our local history. And I remember talking to my friends about it, and they just couldn't understand why I enjoyed history so much. And I'm like, why wouldn't you? It's so amazing. So that was a huge thing for us. My mom actually started to work full time when I was very soon after we started homeschooling, which
Oh,
was
yeah.
kind of remarkable in a
Mhm.
lot of ways. She had not graduated high school because she was 17 when they got married. And right before we started homeschooling, and perhaps this is part of the reason we started, she went back to school. She got her diploma, and then she went to a community college and got a degree in landscape design.
Oh.
And so that was right before we started homeschooling. And I think that gave her such a confidence boost. And then
Mhm.
she knew she could teach us because she finally felt like she was quote unquote qualified. But then she ended up getting a job, and it wasn't even in landscaping. She had
Mhm.
started to volunteer in our community. We live in a town of about 9,000 people, so it's
Okay.
fairly small. And she started volunteering with like downtown beautification projects
Mm.
through landscaping. And then eventually she was hired to be it was called Main Street Director at the time. It was to
Oh.
help kind of with small downtowns. But because of that, we then began to volunteer. Oh my word, we volunteered for everything you can imagine. Like our little family, of six, we were in parks, we were cleaning up parks, and we were helping with events that she was planning.
Right.
And so that was the other part of my childhood, that beyond the education, she was really teaching us how to be involved in our community and how to give back.
Mm.
And I really learned at a very young age that being part of a community meant more than just living there and
Right.
meant making a difference. So that was huge too.
That's phenomenal. Did you enjoy reading a lot young? Did you
Yes,
read? Yeah.
I did.
Other than
Yeah.
history.
Yeah. So before I started homeschooling, I started homeschooling in fifth grade.
Mhm.
I went to our local public school through fourth grade, and the only class that I ever failed was spelling.
Mm.
And I was horrible at spelling. And even in third grade, I got caught cheating on a spelling
I know.
test because I worked so hard. It was the word animal. I could not figure out how to spell it. And so I cheated. The teacher caught me, which was great because
Mm.
it was a good lesson to learn.
Yeah.
But in third grade, my teacher said to me, if we could get you to learn to love to read, I think you would learn to spell. And
Mhm.
so she asked me, what do you enjoy? And I said, well, I loved babies and I loved babysitting. And she said, let's go to the library. So we went to the school library, and she showed me the Babysitter Club series.
Oh, yeah?
And oh my goodness, I fell in love with reading. My mom said that she would see me walk around with a book in hand, food in another hand, TV was on, and and I was always like multitasking, but there was always a book in my hand. And very quickly after that, I discovered the Love Comes Softly series by
Mm.
Jeanette Oak. And that was when history kind of came together with reading, and
Right.
my two loves meshed. And then when I turned over that book, the Love Comes Softly book, I saw it was Bethany House Publishers, and they were
Mm.
in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm in central Minnesota, and it just
Yeah.
all kind of clicked. Like, oh, I could write books for Bethany House,
That
which is, an 11-year-old, 10, 11-year-old. I had no idea what that would entail, but that was where the dream really started.
That's kind of fantastic though. And
Mhm.
honestly, just I think that the draw to books when you're a kid like that and you're just such an avid reader, I don't know because I'm the same way. I don't know how anybody went through for all of that time and didn't have some thought of wanting to write a book.
Mhm.
Tell your story, make up a story. We did it all the time. But
Mhm.
but the actual part of like getting to making that real for you, when did you really start focusing on writing as a potential, like, this is what I want to do?
So I from the age of 10, I knew that I wanted to be an author, but I had no idea if I would have the ability to do that. When I was going through school, so went back to the public school in 11th grade.
Okay.
So, and I did like dual enrollment with a local community college.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to have some credits when I graduated high school to go into college. And my teachers in college, and then I went on to a 4-year university after that. A lot of my teachers started to tell me that they really liked my writing. I had one that said, "You have the potential to be a great writer." And that just stuck with me because that was like the first time I'd had any like reassurance from others who were in the business, so to speak.
Right.
But I dabbled in writing stories. I have a whole file full of stories that I started as a child. And then it wasn't until I was an adult, I actually kind of tried writing some stories, but I really had no idea how to structure a story. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would start them and then I would have no idea where to go from there. I got married at the age of 21, married my high school sweetheart, and we lived in Iowa for a little while he was going to college. And while we were driving back to Minnesota, I would daydream about this story that I had an idea for. And so I started to write that first story. Again, I didn't really finish it, but I would dabble in it for a couple of years. Then we had our children, have 4 kids. And through that whole time, he knew that I wanted to be a writer.
Right.
And I read, I was an avid reader. I read a lot during that time too. Finally, we had a set of twins. Our youngest 2 are twin boys. And when they were not even quite 2, I was just really looking for some creative outlet because I had my 4 kids and it was a lot of work, as we all know. And I started to do craft projects. And my husband was like, "You are not a crafty person." And I said, "I just need some kind of outlet." And so for Christmas that year, he bought me my first laptop computer, which was a little stretch for our finances. But he said to me, "You were born to be a writer." And so it was
Oh,
kind of a nudge
that's
to
great.
start that. So that was where I really started to focus my writing. Again, I had these little babies, and so it wasn't easy. But when they were about 2 years old is when I really got serious about my writing.
Well, what did you do? So high school and college, did you get a degree or start working on a degree in writing? And at that point, or English, or what was your plan at that point?
Sure. Yeah. So when I went to college, my degree was actually going to be public history. I
Okay.
worked for the Minnesota Historical Society at that
Mm-hmm.
point. I worked with them for 10 years. And my hometown is the boyhood home of Charles Lindbergh, the aviator who
Right.
flew across the Atlantic Ocean in 1927. And I worked at his home for 10 years. And that was really where my storytelling really developed because I
Okay.
had to take real history and then give tours. And eventually I worked my way up to the assistant site manager and was hoping, the plan was to be the site manager eventually.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing that while I was going to college. My husband and I got married when I was about halfway through college at that point.
Okay.
And then I was offered that's when I was actually offered the assistant site manager position, which is what I was going to school for. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't finish my degree at that time. But then we had babies, and then I stayed home with them and then started to write. That was what I was working toward, like I said, is public history. But I did take a lot of literature classes and English composition, things like that.
All of that. Yeah.
Mhm.
I was curious because I've read, some of and just listening to your books or reading your books, you get the stories of you and some of the experiences you had
Mhm.
working there. So that's really interesting to me because I think it's the love of history. So just to go to your books, well, first of all, let me just ask some basic questions. This is one I have to ask. What was your first book? What was your first published book?
My first published book was, it's called Four Brides and a Bachelor, and it's
Mhm.
part of the Most Eligible Bachelor collection through Barber Publishing.
Okay.
So it was 4 novellas and 1 book. So that was the first one that came out in May of 2015. So I've
Okay.
been published 10 years. And the book that just recently released in November was my 47th book.
47 books. That's crazy.
Mhm.
Crazy. When did you first get drawn into the interest in time travel? I know now where you got some of the history interest. When did the time travel genre become of interest to you? Who influenced you there?
So I've always enjoyed watching time travel movies, like Back to the Future.
Yeah,
It's probably
of
the
course.
first when I was a kid. There's just so many of them so I never really set out to write time travel. It was never something that I thought I would ever do. It's kind of funny when people reference that I write speculative or fantasy, and I'm like, I still don't even think that I do that. I'm like, I write historical novels that have a little fantasy twist. But what happened was I was hoping to write for Bethany House, like I said, since I was about 10 years old. And over the course of 10 years, I had submitted 6 different novels to them, all straight historical. And they kept giving me lovely rejections. They said to me, your writing fits in here at Bethany House. We really like it, but we need something that stands out, that's really unique and different. Because to break into the market, you really need to have a unique premise. And so I think every author would love to find that. And I had been writing for Barber Publishing. I'd written for Guidepost Publishing. I'd written for Love Inspired. So I had a lot of experience writing. But I was actually talking to my sister. She had told me about a book, and I can't even remember what the name of it was now, but it was a time travel type book. And then I was talking to her about the Outlander series, which has become very popular. And so when we were talking about it, I thought to myself, most time travel has an element where somebody accidentally falls through a portal of time, and then they're stuck in that other time period trying to get back to their normal time. And then while they're there, they might fall in love, or they might, need to win a war or fix a problem. And so then they're torn. Do I go back or do I stay? And as we were talking about that, I thought to myself, what if somebody was born that way? What if they had 2 lives that were kind of running simultaneously, and at a certain point they have to choose one and forfeit the other? And while we were talking in my parents' driveway, the first book just kind of fell into my head. I started seeing all the opportunity. And then over the course of several months, I worked out the idea for book 2 and 3, but I really wasn't sure if it was something that would go over well in the Christian publishing industry because of that time travel element. So like I said, I had been published, I had an agent, but I actually didn't even say anything to her about it because I was trying to talk to other writers and see what they thought. And then I saw that Revell is a sister publishing house with Bethany House. They're under Baker Publishing Group. They had contracted for a series with Jody Hedlund called the Waters of Time series. And it was kind of your typical time travel. And I thought, wow, if Revell is willing to dip their toes into time travel, perhaps Bethany House is. So I sent a message, an email to my agent, and she got back to me like 15 minutes later. And she said, why have you been waiting? This is a brilliant idea. And she said, let's pitch it. So we started pitching it without the book even written.
That's
and
great.
Bethany House, because they had already seen my books, they'd seen my writing, they knew the quality. And so they started to go through the contract process without the whole manuscript being written.
That's amazing. And
Yeah.
did you read? Is that a genre you read very much? Like, had you read a lot of
Time travel?
Yeah. Not really. That was unique. That's great.
No, a lot of
That's
historical. I've told people, so I wrote for Love Inspired. I did contemporary romance for them for a while, and I've written more contemporary romances than I've ever read, because when I have time to read, I'm reading historical novels.
That's right.
Yeah.
But that's great. And I loved historical fiction and, for years. But I remember I was a kid the first time. It was one of the Scholastic Book Club kind of things at school. And I picked up a book called Time Tangle. I'll never forget the name of it. But it was the first thing that I ever read that was kind of really intriguing time travel for me. And I was like, this is great. But, through the years, you don't find a ton of real great, or it's not necessarily historical fiction. And, so I am always looking and always just trying to find that. And when I came across your first book, I was like totally drawn in because of a history. I'm a history major, so that was my, love. So history, and I was like, time travel, this has got to be good. But so as I read it, I was really impressed with your historical approach, because sometimes people don't really understand the history and do well by the history, It's really nerdy for me to say my favorite part is your epilogue sometimes, because I love to hear your thoughts and what was good and true that I figured out was right and all that kind of stuff. But you do a fantastic job of writing the history very well in these stories.
Thank
And
you.
I don't, I feel like I do love the story, but I look at it and I'm like, you don't come across the way that you've woven these stories just tripping into that. Like you must have to do a lot of research for these books, and to weave the times that you have, the paths that you have together in the way that you do has just been great. It's been a great enjoyment just to see it and to appreciate it and to see how you've connected it. And honestly, if you're reading the Timeless series, I would just say anybody that's not read it yet, read it. If you have started reading it, it's better the further in that you get. And it's like, I'm sad that there's only going to be one more book. And so then I'm like, well, we got to talk about that.
We do. So we actually, I signed a contract for 8, 9, and 10.
Awesome. So we got more to come.
Yeah. And we're not putting a cap on it there either.
Okay,
I've spoken with my publishing team, and we're all kind of holding our hands open. And if at the, when book 10 comes around, if we feel like there's still interest and there's still stories to explore, I love writing these books, and I will keep writing them as long as readers want them. They were just supposed to be. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's fine. I was going to say, are you really enjoying them yourself?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, a lot. There's a lot of twists and turns in these books. There's a lot of big surprises, which I think is what people really enjoy. They're not really predictable. And that is because there's 2 or sometimes 3 timelines. And people have asked me if they're hard to write because of that. And strangely enough, they're actually easier for me to write than straight historical. It's harder to come up with twists and turns in straight historical than it is in this kind of a situation. But there was only supposed to be 3 books in the series. And because readers have loved it and it is growing, like it's still continuing to grow. Word of mouth has just been invaluable for the series. That's why we're now planning 10. So yeah. I think all of us are shocked by that.
I think it's great. And it is, anytime at this point, because you've got, it's clean. It's not something that anybody has to worry about. Where is it going to go? And the history is phenomenal, but the stories are just so good. I love the characters. Now, who's your favorite character of these Timeless series? I have so many loves, but who would you say was one of your favorites to write?
That's kind of hard because they're so different. I really enjoyed book 3. They're identical twin sisters are the time crossers, Hope and Grace. Yeah. Very different, and is told from first person point of view, in Hope's point of view, and then Grace's. So I knew that they had to be really, really unique voices. And so I used my daughters. I have 2 daughters. They're 19 and 21, and they are represented very well in those girls. Oh. So that was a lot of fun to do. And then book 5, I really enjoyed because Catherine in that book is me. If somebody, I've never been able to answer that question. People have asked me, is your heroine like you? And I used to say, well, little bits and pieces here and there until I came to that book. Okay. And I'm like, this one's going to be me. So it was easy to write her character because I would just ask myself, what would I do in that situation? But out of all of them, if I had to choose one character who I love the most, it would probably be Mama from book 1. She's not a main character, but she's Libby's mother. And I was able to put so much of my own mom in that story. And so she loves that.
That's great.
She's like, I love that I'm Mama. So that was a lot of fun.
That is a lot of fun. I think that I really enjoyed Catherine, and, just the story there. That was really, again, when you listen to the epilogue, you had me wanting to read these other books now, because was that hard for, I mean, okay, you've dealt with the Salem witch trials, you've dealt with,
Mm-hmm.
Jack the Ripper. Like, where is it hard for you to dig into some of those things, and how does that impact you as you're studying and
Yeah.
writing?
So I've done a lot of research. We kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. I usually research for about 6 months ahead of plotting my story so that I am as immersed as I can be in the time periods. And I know so much about these time periods that never even make it into the book, but I feel like my character should know all of the things as much as she or he can.
Mm,
But when it came to book 3, which deals with the Salem witch trials, and then book 5, which deals with Jack the Ripper, those were very, very difficult things to research. I knew a lot about the Salem witch trials. I'd been to Salem several times. I'm actually descended from both sides of the Salem witch trials. So I've
oh,
always had
wow.
a keen interest in the witch trials. And that was part of the reason I wanted to write that story, is to clarify a lot of things, because people have a lot of preconceived ideas and misconceptions about what happened there.
Mm,
But one of the things that people ask me often is, do I dream about the books that I'm writing? And I've never dreamt about a single book I've written, which seems so
interesting.
wild to me, because I have very vivid dreams about other things, but not my books. But when I was researching for the Jack the Ripper book, I actually did dream about Jack the Ripper.
Mm,
And so that's how much it affected me,
yeah.
because, like I said, I don't usually dream about that. But again, that situation, there's so many books about Jack and so many different theories and stuff, that it was kind of fun to come up with my own theory
Yeah.
and then add the time crossing element, which obviously makes it very unlikely
Yeah.
that that's what actually
That's
happened.
right.
But it was still fascinating. Even though those are difficult topics,
Hmm.
I love researching anything that has to do with history. So it was fun.
Yeah, that was some dark times that I felt like you did handle it well. And I have to
Thanks.
admit, going into book 5 with Jack the Ripper, I had to question how you were going to resolve it. So I loved it. So, just thinking toward future, I know you said that there's going to be some more in the Timeless series. What kind of books have you thought about writing that maybe you haven't done yet? Or is there some, big thing that you're like, I would really love to do this one day and write about this?
Yeah, actually, my husband and I were just talking about it just this morning. And I don't want to talk too much about it,
Right,
because I
right.
really do want to write the story someday. But thankfully, with the Timeless series, I've been able to explore a lot of different historical time periods that aren't super common in Christian fiction,
Yeah.
which makes it a lot of fun. And so I've touched on most of the time periods that I've wanted to, but there is a desire in me to kind of write, and this sounds so strange, kind of a dystopian novel
Mm,
about a future day and time when the world has been corrupted and we need to resurrect some American heroes. And
oh,
so
very cool.
there, so there, I had this idea years ago, and I've worked it all out, but it would take so much historical research, because
Hmm.
I would need to kind of resurrect some of our great national heroes, and I would never want to misrepresent anybody.
Right.
And so that's kind of why I have been hesitant to write that story, because it would just be
That's
so much work. I told my husband, so right now I'm doing about 3 or 4 books here that I'm writing, which is quite a
okay.
lot. And I write full time now. And I told him that I will tackle that dystopian novel someday when I'm only writing 1 book a year.
Someday. That's the
Mhm.
but that sounds very interesting. Have you found that your books have crossed over outside of the Christian fiction realm in popularity?
Yeah, that I think that's another reason why my publisher's been so excited to continue the series, is we have seen a really big crossover into the secular market, for better or worse. So because of that, some of the reviews that come in on Goodreads have not been super kind because it's unapologetically Christian and it's unapologetically pro-life. And so there's been some backlash a little bit, nothing major, nothing that's too concerning, but it pops up from time to time. But on the other side of that, I've been able to talk to people who have never read Christian fiction and didn't even know it existed. And a lot of people who now are so excited to find this whole treasure trove of books, not just mine, but other people's too, that they're now enjoying. I was actually speaking to a library. This was like a month and a half ago, and there was a woman who came in, and she was dressed with a burqa, and she came up to me at the end. She was so sweet, and she said to me, she said, "I homeschool my children," and she said, "I'm a woman of faith." She said, "Not a Christian, but a woman of faith, and I want you to know that the books that you're writing have impacted me more than any other books I've ever read." Wow. And that to me was so powerful. Like both of us had tears in our eyes because it was such a cool way that God is connecting hearts. And I love that she came and that she shared that with me. So it's been fun to see a crossover into a lot of different areas that I personally would never be able to cross over into, but through my books, it is definitely a ministry.
Yeah. Well, stories traverse a lot of obstacles, when we can connect with a story. And I think that is amazing. And it doesn't surprise me that they've been popular in the secular realm also, because like I said, they're just written very well. And, I'm not like, I'm a connoisseur of books, but I'm sitting here. It is just, it's my pleasure to be able to tell people when there are good books. And, I think Christian fiction has developed into a genre that has gained a lot of credibility and a lot of, good authors over the years. I can remember when it was not real strong, for the fiction realm. And so seeing that and just being, able to share that with so many families and so many readers. But there's just very few that are like the Timeless series. And, for me to be able to share with families that series is available and out there. We started it, my daughter and I started it, she's 18, and we started reading them together when we found the first book and couldn't wait for the next book. It was like, because we found it pretty early on. So that was great. But, it was something that we would enjoy, and we would just get caught up in the stories together. But, that was, she was still in high school, loved history, but loved talking about what was real and what, really happened. And she's read a lot of historical fiction, and she says these are just really steeped, and they really are. So that was one of the things I couldn't wait to hear about from you, is when did you start loving history? And I can't wait to let her tell her, she'll listen to the podcast, but to tell her about where you grew up, because just that frame of reference, for your basically your entire life to have the history surrounding you was just amazing. Did you get to talk to people who lived in this state very much about what life had been like for them?
No. So the last living family member who was there, she was in her 80s, and I was just a little girl. And my mom used to always say to us, like, do not bother Laura Jane, her name was, like, do not. But we would see her standing at her window. So her house, there was two mansions side by side. She lived in one of them. The other one was closed. And it's up on a hill. And then there's this big, the hill that goes down to the river. And then the carriage house was kind of at the bottom of the hill. Okay. So we would look up and see the backside of her house, and we could see her standing there watching us. But we were never allowed to go to the top of the hill because so I never did get a chance to talk to her. But after she passed away, the homes were donated to our city, and now the city operates them. The Friends Group operates them. And so it's a conference and retreat center. And then one of the houses is a museum. And periodically, once in a while, I get the opportunity to volunteer there and give tours, which I absolutely love. And so that's been a really cool way for me to still kind of stay connected to that part of my life.
That's a neat opportunity. So
Yeah.
what would you say if I were, going to have you speak to someone who is wanting to start writing and who wants to share their story? I know you talked about how you didn't really know how to put all of the elements together and work it out to begin with. What would you suggest to someone who's interested?
So one of the things that I would suggest is going online and finding, back when I started, we had blogs, and there was a lot of writers who were writing blogs. They're still out there. So one person who has taught me the most, and I kind of mentioned her, Susan May Warren. I didn't mention her. I was sorry. I was doing a different thing last night, talking to a different group about her. She's been a mentor in my life, and she is a teacher, and she's also a very prolific author. She also homeschooled her kids too. And she it's called Novel Academy.
Okay.
And that is a great place to get plugged in if you're just learning the craft of writing, and also the community of writers on there, because you need to know how to craft a story, but then you also need to have connections within the publishing industry to, help network and stuff. That's always a good thing. So I would recommend getting plugged into Novel Academy. And there's just so many different authors out there who are also teaching writing. You could just do a search, a Google search, especially for Christian author teachers, whatever. But as for writing itself, one of the pieces of advice that I often give is, oftentimes somebody has like a story idea in their head. And what I've seen over the years is when somebody is working on that same story over and over and over and over and over, and they've kind of beaten it to death, they're really not learning anything new if they're working on that same story. So I always recommend putting it to the side, starting a fresh story. Write that story, edit it, put it to the side, write the next story. Before my first 20,000 word novella was published, I had over 500,000 words written in story form. And I learned so much, because if I had just stuck with that first story idea that I had, it's never been published. It's not publishable. But I would not have grown as a writer if I had not put it aside and moved on.
Yeah, that's great advice, actually. And do you find that as you're writing, are you still an avid reader? Do you still read as much?
I don't read as much. I used to read when my kids were really little. I still read about a book a week. Before that, I read several books a week. I only get a chance to read when I have breaks, when I take vacations and stuff, because I'm writing full-time, 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And I find that it's harder for me to get into a novel when I'm in the middle of my own writing, because my brain is in a different process mode. And so I found that I love audiobooks for that reason. If I'm not actually reading the page, it does something different in my brain. So I don't read as much as I used to, which is really sad for me. But when I get a chance, I still do. And I still have my favorite authors that I still try to read each of their books when they come out. And many of them have become good friends of mine too. So that's really an added bonus.
So who are some of your favorites?
So I love Laura France. She's one of my all-time favorites. I love Karen Whittemire. Elizabeth Camden is probably one of my very favorites. She has really strong heroines. And then Lynn Austen, she will be my forever favorite. My husband teases me. He's like, you use the word favorite very loosely. I'm like, but they all are my favorites.
All favorites.
So those are just some. I just recently got into the Emma M. Lyon series by Beth Brower, which is not Christian fiction. It does have a little bit of a Christian worldview, but there's a couple of swear words here and there. But the story as a whole it's just so engaging. And I've been really enjoying listening to the audiobooks for that.
What kind of books were inspiring to you, like through your teen years?
So I read almost exclusively Bethany House historical fiction. So Tracy Peterson and Lorraine Snelling, Lynn Austen, a lot of those. Kathy Marie Hake. I think she was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if it was historical fiction and it had the Bethany House logo, that was what I was reading.
That's what you read.
But I also read Harvest House and Barber and those kinds of books too.
Yeah. What about for classics? Because you homeschooled your kids, right? When you started out with them and wanting them to be people who would grow up, hopefully to love reading as well, right?
Yeah.
What did you start out with them?
My favorite series of all time, and when I use the word favorite, I mean favorite. The Betsy Tacy series by Maud Hart Lovelace is I get goosebumps because I spoke to the Betsy Tacy Society this last week. I was their guest speaker and it was such a moment. I was like, I've come full circle. I love Betsy Tacy books. I've read them several times myself. I read them to my daughters growing up. She grew up in Mankato, Minnesota, which is a couple hour drive from us. So I took them to the Betsy Tacy houses when they were little. And if I could say any series of books to read, especially to little girls, it's that. Of course, Little House on the Prairie, I've read that series several times. Anne of Green Gables was another series I read. So all of those are very near and dear to my heart.
I didn't even know there was a Betsy Tacy Society.
Yes. You should become a member.
Be a member. I can remember when I found out a few years ago, my daughter, I loved Nancy Drew books. That was the mysteries. She loves mystery. And so she was reading through all of them. And I came across the getaways that they had where you would go for a Nancy Drew weekend and get to live out the book. And I was like, what? They have something that sounds amazing, right? But I think it's so funny because there are so many of the classics that, we pull from our childhood, and you find out those things, they withstand the test of time, and people love them across so many different generations too. Yeah, I mean, just amazing. Did your children grow to love reading?
Yes, my daughters have. My sons have not as much. But my oldest daughter is a senior this year. She's a student body president of her college, and she's majoring in politics, history, and economics with an emphasis in journalism. And she would love to go into political journalism. She is a fantastic writer. I read her stuff, and I'm like, where do you get this from? And she's always like, Mom, the apple doesn't far fall from the tree. And then my second daughter is not as much of a writer, but she is an avid reader. She loves to read. So I love that. They usually brainstorm with me most of my books. A lot of the stories come from the mix of the three of us. One is really good at detail and one's really good at big picture. So it's fun to be able to talk to them and get help with my timeless series.
That is a lot of fun. So in homeschooling, I found that my two youngest kids were homeschooled from the beginning, and they got to be my brainstorming partners for most anything creative. And it was a lot of fun to always be able to, talk out those things. But so I can definitely, that resonates here very much. But
I love talking to my kids about history, especially my oldest, because she's majoring in history. And I joke that I created 4 humans to talk to history about because they have grown up we've traveled a lot for my books to do research, and they've grown up going to all of the historic sites, everywhere that we could go, we've gone. So one summer, I think we had 17 museums. I was I don't think you guys have to do history this year. We've done it all summer.
That's amazing. Where was your favorite place that you traveled to research?
Oh, goodness. I have so many, but the very first one that pops into my head, I'll go with that one because it popped in. I loved going to Salem, not Salem town where we think of Salem. There's actually a village called Danvers, and that used to be Salem Village. So there was Salem Village and Salem Town, and they changed it to Danvers. I'm not even sure why, probably because of all of the trauma. But almost the entire Salem witch trials happened in Danvers. And so I was able to take my husband and my daughters, and my niece was living out in Boston, and she came with us, and it was just a rainy, drizzly, perfect autumn day in New England. And we went into Danvers and just explored everywhere. And that was just so much fun. But one of many places, we went to Washington, D.C. We did every museum you can possibly imagine. We've been there a couple of times, but that one time we also went to Colonial Williamsburg, which is where I set my first book. I've been there a couple of times. I'm actually heading back on Thursday. I'm taking my sister and a couple of friends who've never been there.
That'll be amazing.
Yeah, a lot of fun places.
Yeah, I think that that would be one of my favorite parts of being an author is the travel. The travel research. But, it makes your life very rich. And I think that when you're able to homeschool and combine all of these passions and all of these loves, that you end up with kids too who can follow their passion and they know. I mean, just the ability to totally immerse yourself in the things that you love and are interested in and can become really good at, So that's exciting. It's exciting. So I was going to ask, I always like to ask this question, like everybody goes through rough times when they're creating, parenting, just whatever it might be. And I always am curious to hear what resonates in the back of your head, like what plays on repeat when you're going through a time and you need encouragement, whether it's a quote from a great book that you've read or a scripture. What would you share with people who maybe just need that extra bit of like, here's the encouragement to keep you persevering?
A lot of things go through my head, and I think it depends on the season and the trials. But there's one thing that my dad said to me years ago. My dad is not a big talker. He's kind of more the silent type. But when he says something, you listen because it's worth hearing. And I remember years ago, we were driving together and I was just talking about all of the problems in the world and all of the things that overwhelmed me. And he said to me, you know what? You can't always change the whole world, but you can change the place where you're standing. And that has always just resonated with me, whether it's, I'm taking care of little kids who need encouragement, whatever. I can't change the whole world for them, but I can change the spot where I'm standing. And it's really shaped who I have become as an adult and how I parented and even the books that I write, because I can't change the world. I can't change all of the hardships that are going on. But from my keyboard, from the place where I'm sitting, I can change that spot. And hopefully my books then are going out into the hearts and the minds of the people reading them and encouraging and offering hope wherever they land. So that is something that I hold true. And it's not overwhelming then. If I can just change the spot where I'm sitting, it's not overwhelming.
I actually love that. And, I think that that's true for all of us. We can do what we can do where we are. God puts us where we are and gives us what he gives us to work with and who to influence. And those are wise words. Very wise words. Yeah. I appreciate
He's a wise guy.
Has he made it into one of your books?
No, but so I've started to self-publish some novels that I wrote in the past, and this year, The Aviator's Lady was one that I just released, and I wrote that 10 years ago, and finally just released it. But it's always been my dad's favorite book. He's read almost all of my books, and that's his favorite. And so I dedicated that one solely to him. I've dedicated other books to both of my parents together, but that was just for him. And it is so cute because he's online. He's sharing it with his friends on Facebook. Wherever he goes, he'll call me and say, I just talked to so-and-so at the grocery store and told him you should buy your book. So, yeah. And of course, I feel like every book I write, different pieces of the people that I know pop into different characters. So he's there. It's just, and I am naming a character after him in an upcoming book. His name is George. So he'll have that.
I have had the privilege of meeting some wonderful people and people who I love, but I'm very excited to talk to you today because I am a fan.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Thanks for listening to the Not by the Book podcast from the Florida Parent Educators Association. To learn more about homeschooling in Florida or to find resources to help you on this amazing journey, visit our website at FPEA.com. If you have any suggestions for future guests, contact me, Suzanne, at notbythebook@fpea.com. Thanks again for listening, and be inspired to live your life not by the book.